There's a situation a lot of people know well. You walk into a meeting, an interview, a dinner with people you've never met, and at some point someone introduces you to a stranger. You exchange a greeting, maybe a few words, and already something is happening. Without deciding to, without planning it, something in you starts building an idea about that person. Not a tentative idea, not a rough draft. A fairly concrete feeling, trust or distance, warmth or discomfort, interest or reservation. And what's striking isn't that the feeling shows up, it's how fast it shows up. Sometimes before you've exchanged more than a couple of words. Sometimes before you even know the other person's name. The mind already went there, already looked, already landed on something. The question worth asking is what exactly it was looking at, and why that process moves so fast that by the time we notice it, it's already done. The most honest answer has nothing to do with shallowness or conscious bias. It has to do with something much more basic. The mind needs to read people quickly. It always has. For most of human history, sizing up a stranger wasn't a cognitive luxury. It was a practical necessity. Is this person a threat? Can I trust them? Are they with me or not? Waiting too long to answer that question could have real consequences. So the nervous system developed a way to answer it almost automatically, using whatever information was available in the shortest time possible. That system is still running. What changed is the context we use it in. We're not activating it mainly around physical threats anymore. We're activating it in job interviews, first dates, doctor's appointments, hallway conversations. But the mechanism works the same way. It takes what it can see and hear, processes it in fractions of a second, and generates an impression. Before we can reason about that impression, it's already there. What the mind draws on in that moment is a mix of very different signals. The face, obviously. Facial expression is one of the most powerful channels we have for reading other people. Milliseconds of an expression can trigger emotional responses before we've consciously registered seeing anything at all. But tone of voice matters too. The rhythm, volume, and pace of how someone speaks can create a read of confidence or nervousness, authority or uncertainty, completely independent of what they're actually saying. Posture matters. How someone occupies space matters. Even details that seem irrelevant, like how a person walks into a room, whether they make eye contact, whether their handshake is firm or hesitant, all of it feeds into the picture being assembled. The problem isn't that the mind uses those signals. The problem is that the picture gets assembled much faster than it gets verified. The information we receive in those first few seconds is partial, fragmented, pulled out of context. But the impression it generates doesn't feel partial or fragmented. It feels pretty solid. That's the trap. The speed of the process gives the result a false sense of certainty. And that's where something else starts to mix in, because the mind doesn't read each new person like a blank page. It reads them through everything it's already experienced, through past encounters, learned patterns, associations built up over time. If someone has a tone of voice similar to a person you once trusted deeply, that can activate a positive feeling before there's any objective reason to have one. If the way someone moves reminds you of an uncomfortable experience from the past, a sense of wariness can kick in that has nothing to do with the person actually standing in front of you. These filters aren't rational or conscious. We don't choose to apply them. They're just there, built into the quick read system. And alongside them, stereotypes are also at work. The mind matches visible traits to familiar categories, and those categories come loaded with automatic expectations and judgments. This can involve all kinds of bias, some cultural, some personal, most of them built on associations we've never examined closely because we've never had to do so consciously. The system just uses them. There's a phenomenon that shows just how far the influence of that first judgment can reach. It's called the halo effect, and it describes something that happens surprisingly often. When we perceive a positive trait in someone, we tend to extend that positive feeling to other traits we haven't evaluated yet. If someone seems confident, we also picture them as competent, reliable, smart. If someone generates immediate warmth, we tend to interpret what they say more favorably, and the reverse is just as true. A negative first impression can color everything that follows with the same shade. A gesture that would go unnoticed in someone else, in a person who already made us uncomfortable, can feel like confirmation of something. The point is that a first impression doesn't stay in the past. It acts on the present. It shapes how we interpret everything that comes after. And it does that in ways we don't always recognize because we don't feel like we're interpreting. We feel like we're simply seeing what's there. Changing a first impression takes effort because the mind leans toward consistency. Once it forms an idea about someone, it tends to process new information in a way that confirms that idea. Details that contradict it can slip by more easily. Details that reinforce it carry more weight. Not because we're stubborn or closed off, but because that's how the search for cognitive coherence works. The system prefers a stable picture over one that keeps getting revised. Updating takes more energy than maintaining. That doesn't mean first impressions never change. They do, but they rarely change on their own, without something fairly significant pushing back against them. And in the meantime, that initial read can be quietly influencing how we talk to someone, how much we believe them, how much distance we keep, without us being fully aware of it. The interesting move here isn't to point at this mechanism as a flaw that needs to be removed. Quick social reading serves a purpose. In many situations, it's still genuinely useful. The point is something else, recognizing that this process exists, that it has momentum, that it doesn't always operate on what's actually in front of us, and that its speed is not the same thing as its accuracy. When we understand how a first impression forms, something shifts in the way we look at people, not necessarily making us more suspicious of what we feel, but opening up a question we don't always think to ask: how much of what we're seeing is actually coming from the other person, and how much is coming from us, from our history, from the categories we use to make sense of the world, from old stories that get triggered without warning when we meet someone new. That question doesn't have a clean or final answer, but asking it already changes something. A first impression can be a reasonable starting point for getting to know someone. The trouble is when it becomes the ending point, when we give those first few seconds the same weight we'd give years of actually knowing a person. The feeling of certainty that initial judgment produces can be very convincing, but a person is always more complex, more contradictory, and more surprising than the idea we formed of them in the time it took to shake their hand.